So I'm Sarah de Carvalho, and in 1991 I founded Happy Child. I came to Brazil 2 years earlier, and having given up my career and lived in a favela, which is something I said I'd never do, so that I could identify with these children that I'd come to Brazil to help. In 1991, especially in Rio, which is where I was living at the time, there was a very serious problem on the streets. There were a considerable number of street children who would run away from the favelas, from the slums, from situations of abuse and neglect. At that time there were the extermination squads who were literally paid for, ex-security guards, ex-police, who killed the children. They were known as the exterminators. So you had children being murdered on the streets. So it was far, far worse than I could ever imagine. I've never ever forgotten the first time I went on the streets. I was terrified. But I went with a team of people who knew the gang and knew what they were doing, so I felt safe with that. And we visited a gang who'd made their home under a viaduct. And of course you've got to remember that when you walk in under that viaduct, you are going into their home. And there were sort of broken sofas and boxes, and again the smell hits you, and the smell of drugs, the smell of feces. And this little boy came up with a deep voice, but tiny, because of course they look a lot younger than they are. And he invited us in to sit down on the sofa, and I just sat there, and all these kids, I just couldn't believe. It made me feel so angry, because they're kids, they're children, and yet their whole childhood's been stolen from them. And that was, I'd been in Brazil 2 weeks. I didn't speak the language, but it doesn't matter, because they can feel when you're there to help. And I remember they come up, they're very affectionate, they give you a hug, and I just sat there and I just thought, it's like the devil's playground, These children, they're not children anymore. And suddenly the leader of the gang got this bottle and smashed the end and started cutting the boys. And I thought then and there, I can't go home. I've got to stay and try and make a difference for some of them. Yeah, the root of the problem is poverty, desperate poverty. And the consequence of the desperate poverty is you have generations of families where perhaps the mother has had a series of relationships with different men, and she's possibly got 7 children from different men. She's living in a home with no running water, mud floor, in a slum. She can't feed her children. The only thing that gives her self-worth is actually giving birth and having, she's looking for love, so she's always looking for another relationship. She goes out to prostitute in order to feed her children. And in the end, the children whose basic needs aren't even met, and who perhaps, have never had a role model, a father role model, or the father role model is a stepfather who's abusing them physically, sexually, they go out to the streets. And for me, nothing gets worse than that. It's nothing worse than a child on the streets. For a child to be on the streets, it has to have been pretty serious at home. And then what happens on the streets is they meet other kids on the streets from similar circumstances, and suddenly they've got a family that they've never had. So although it seems kind of perverse, the street gang becomes their family. When they're on the streets, they're very vulnerable. They're very low self-esteem. They've never felt loved, or the very person that should have loved them was abusing them, and they don't feel valued. They fill that hole with drugs. So they're immediately, you can't go on the streets without finding a street child smelling glue. They've put it in a bottle, and they'll be sniffing. It's a paint solvent, very, very strong paint solvent. And then the problem at the moment is crack. And of course crack is very addictive, so they'll immediately become addicted to drugs. You know, the dangers are that they're malnourished, they're dirty, so that gives way to infection. And then there's gang rivalry. So at night when they eventually get to sleep, or there is a danger that, you know, if they've fallen out with someone, they set fire to each other. And then equally under the influence of the drugs, they can get hit by a car or a bus on the road. If you see the older teenagers, I mean, the key is to get them off the streets when they're young, because the longer they stay on the streets, the harder it is to get the streets out of their hearts. And a lot of them die before they reach the age of 18. So Belo Horizonte is now in its 19th year. And today we have a team of 63 staff. We're just about to open our 11th home. And we have homes for brothers and sisters so they don't get separated. We have homes for girls, we have homes for boys, we have homes for teenagers, which is more like a hostel where they're contributing towards the running of the house. And we have a farm where it's an eco farm where they can go and spend the weekends. We have a team that specifically works with the families of psychologists and social workers. And yeah, the work's grown beyond my wildest dreams. And now it's completely self-sustaining. So the work is funded by the local government, local churches, and local businesses, which is it's a real achievement. And so now we're replicating that model. We call it a 12-step model of prevention, rescue, rehabilitation, and reintegration back into society in the northeast of Brazil. We read in the newspapers that the economy is growing in Brazil, and it is, and that's a good thing. But the reality is there's a huge disparity between the rich and the poor, and I reckon that'll take a whole generation for us to see a difference, particularly in the northeast of Brazil. And everyone recognises that. So for me, Recife is like Belo Horizonte, Rio was 20 years ago. And there's a terrific urban congestion of people coming in from the rural areas. So the favelas are very full, and there's a big problem with alcoholism, drug trafficking, and children are sent to the streets to beg for food, and they turn to prostitution. So there's a lot of girls on the streets, pregnant from the age of 12, a lot of boys, but particularly girls. And in this area, there's a problem of child sex tourism, which is very serious and which completely breaks my heart, breaks our hearts. So we are really determined to get this work, let it grow as quickly as possible. But for me, what's key is that we have this partnership with the government now, and we're just in the process of that. So the UK have committed, like as we did in Belo Horizonte, to help them over the next 3 to 5 years. We've agreed to fund 50% of the work. This year we want to treble our work. So what we're missing now is the urgency of opening a home for the girls who are pregnant. So our plans are before the end of the year to open a home for 10 girls and 10 babies at any one time. I was on the streets last night and I met a group of street children. The majority were girls, and some of them were pregnant, some of them were 12 years old. And that also we want to open a home, a hostel for teenage boys. There are a lot of teenage boys on the streets also, and it'll be the first home in this state for the teenagers. So that's what we badly need, but we obviously need support to get there. Last night we came, because they tend to move, the gangs tend to move, and we came across some street children in the centre of Recife. And the first thing that hits you is the smell of the paint solvent that they're sniffing. It kind of makes you almost feel nauseous after a while. And you can, a typical street child, very, very thin, dirty, kind of, a little bit of the Artful Dodger type. And the immediate thing is you think, oh, you think you might be frightened, But actually there's nothing to be frightened of because they're actually only kids. And even the elder ones who kind of are slightly bigger and it might feel a bit more threatening, they actually just want love and attention. And so as soon as they realize you're there to help, everything changes. And we met this little boy called Guilherme, and he's 11 years old. And he'd been on the streets for a year, and he is addicted to crack. And I sat down with him and I spoke to him, and I said, one of the things we always say to them is, what's your dream? What do you want to be when you grow up? And of course he didn't know, because he'd been on the streets so long he'd forgotten even who he was. So I said, if you come off the streets now and come to our home, our boys' home, you can start to read and write, and you can start to dream to be somebody. And I said to him, do you want to come? Do you want to come with us now? And he went. And then a few minutes later when we were leaving, I said, come on, come on. He went like this, because of course he's part of the gang and the older ones would want him to stay with them, and he'd been there for over a year. So I went up to him and I said, you know, our home isn't a prison, it's a home full of love, and there's other kids there. We go to the beach, you know, at the weekends. There's lovely, delicious food every day. You can have a comfortable bed tonight. You can take a lovely shower. And if you really don't like it, you can tell us, and there's nothing holding you there. But you know something? I said to him, I've been doing this work 20 years. And if you stay on the streets and end up like some of these big boys, you might never reach the age of 18. So he said, I want to come. So he did. He came back to the boys' house with us. Yeah, I said to him in the car, are you feeling nervous? And he said, no. He was quite quiet, a bit apprehensive, but as soon as he walked in to our home, it was like, you know, you could just see on his face, he was smiling. We've got animals. You know, the other kids came and said, you know, welcome to our home. Cedar, who was wonderful, went and got him some clothes, and he went off and had a shower, came out, you know, all feeling fresh, and he had a sore in his leg, so they did first aid. He had some food. He wasn't very hungry because, of course, one of the things that drugs does is it dulls their hunger. And I'm sure he would have slept really well tonight. And we just have to pray that the lure of the streets, you know, and his addiction doesn't pull him away. I think what we provide for them is a safe home. If you're going to work, our absolute focus is to get them back into their family, whatever that might look like, or get them back into society. But you've got to take them out of that place of abuse, be it on the streets or in the slums, in order to help them and then help their family and get them back together again. So what we do is we provide them with a home. And literally, it's like a family. So the temptation is, oh, come on, let's find a building and fill it with as many children as possible, but that doesn't work. So in our homes, we wouldn't take more than 10 or 12 children at a time. We immediately encourage them to go back to school. A lot of them are behind, can't read and write, so that affects their self-esteem. So we have teachers on staff, and some of them in the end, you know, do very well at school, which is great. And of course, education is so good for self-esteem. And then they work as a family. It is literally a family in our home, so they all have responsibilities. We start to put boundaries around them. We even have to teach them how to eat sometimes. And we teach them hygiene, and a lot of them get professional help from psychologists and psychiatrists. And I think as they, you know, they grow in that healthy atmosphere. And I think what's worked for us is that we've learned over the years that not every child is going to be able to go back home. And so they'll stay with us until they have an education, they have a vocation, and they can be independent enough to rent their own home and be their own person. And that makes it all worthwhile. That's so fulfilling. What's key is that everyone's given an opportunity. Everybody deserves a chance. Everybody deserves to have a hand reach out and say, come on. And I've seen enough to know that a difference can be made.